Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, if you're not particularly interested in Nikon camera equipment or equipment in general, then you're more than welcome to give this video a miss. Although I'm going to put some nice bits of footage and stills images in to try and keep it a bit more interesting. Now, this is a long-term review of my Nikon Z6II. I've been using it for over 2 years now, and is it any good for wildlife photography or not? So this is a review that's specific towards wildlife photography. And I have to say, over the last couple of years, anyone that's been watching my channel, you will have seen I've got some great footage and I've captured some great stills using the Z6II. So yes, it is a good wildlife camera, but there are certain aspects that I think need to be discussed. And of course, the first one and most important has got to be the autofocus. And I find the autofocus is, let's say, it's good, stroke adequate. It's not as good as a lot of other camera bodies on the market now, because it doesn't have animal eye detect. Well, it has a version of animal eye detect, but only good for cats and dogs, which as wildlife photographers, that's fairly irrelevant, I would say. So I tend to use the Z6II the way I would use a DSLR. I use it as either a single AF point or a group of 9 autofocus points, rather than using any of the automatic functions. You know, I won't let the camera automatically try and track the animals, because I find that that's not reliable enough. So when it comes to autofocus, if you use it as you would use a DSLR, it's good, it locks on quite nicely, and it's fairly accurate, and it's fairly quick. And I'm using these with F-type lenses with the Z2F adapter. So in general, the autofocus is okay. Is it as good as other camera manufacturers' bodies of a similar price? No, because it hasn't got bird eye detect. And of course, it's not as good as the Z9, but the Z9 is the top of the range, 5,000 plus camera. Let's look at a few images now. So first up, we've got a cuckoo standing on a branch. Now this is where I would use a single autofocus point, because it's fairly simple to get that autofocus point and place it bang on the cuckoo's eye. And the Z6II will focus quickly and accurately on that bird. And even if the bird's smaller in the frame, so here we've got a stone chat, and it's obviously a smaller bird, and it's smaller in the frame, it's still relatively simple to get a single AF point and use the 4-way switch on the back of the camera and place it on that bird's head. And again, the Z6II will have absolutely no problems focusing quickly on this animal. Now, when we look at the third picture, we've got a cuckoo in flight, and this is where I would switch to dynamic AF. And that is, dynamic AF gives us a block of 9 autofocus points. And the reason I do this is because now we've got a moving subject, and it might be really hard to get one single autofocus point and place it on the bird's head or on the bird's eye. But the dynamic AF gives us a block of 9 AF points that are active. So it means that if I miss getting the center point on the bird's head, one of the points around the outside of that active AF point will pick it up and focus on the cuckoo. And in this case, I think it's a better option for a moving subject. And again, generally I find the Z6II is fast and accurate when it comes to focusing on this type of animal, and the autofocus system copes well. We could also use a function called wide area AF. And what this does is it gives you a box, and anything within a box in the viewfinder, and anything within that box the camera will try and focus on. And again, I find this works quite well. It's very similar to dynamic AF, and you can use a small box or a large box. All of these options I will be using under a continuous focusing. So the camera is going to continually focus while I hold either the back button down or the shutter release button down. And then last but not least, we've got the auto area AF, where every focus point is active on the viewfinder. And as I say, I don't find this to be a great option, because we haven't got bird eye detect. So it means the camera's going to try and focus on something within the frame, but I don't find it to be that quick or that accurate. Now you can, by pressing the OK button on the back of the camera, bring up a box, and you can place that box on the subject, and then the box will move around the frame and try and track the bird or the animal you're trying to keep in focus. But again, I don't find that to be absolutely foolproof. In fact, I find it to be fairly inaccurate a lot of the time, so I tend to avoid that. So my advice is single AF, either dynamic or a group of AF points, dynamic AF, or possibly experiment with the wide area AF small or large box. I should mention that I don't receive any equipment free of charge from anybody, so I don't get anything from Nikon or any other camera manufacturer. All the stuff I use and I talk about, I've actually bought myself. So I think that's important, and these are just my personal observations from using the Z6II for over 2 years. Now, when it comes to ISO performance, I think the ISO performance on the Z6II, Nikon Z6II, is excellent. It's a 24 megapixel body, so it means the pixels are not scrunched together tightly on that full frame sensor, and the high ISO performance, which is important for low light work when we're photographing moving subjects such as wildlife, the high ISO performance is excellent. And I've looked at pictures taken on the Z6II and pictures taken with a higher megapixel count sensor, and the Z6II performs really well up against those sensors. So I think from a noise control point of view, hard to beat really. It's a really good camera body. As I've already mentioned, the Nikon Z6II really does control noise well, and if you look at this picture of a great spotted woodpecker, this was shot at ISO 4000, which is a really high ISO number, but you can see there's virtually no noise present on the woodpecker. And if you look at the background, and that's where you'd more usually see the noise present, you can see the noise has been controlled and handled really well as well. And even if we look at the cropped in version of this picture, noise on both the background and the subject still looks really good. Now, if you look at this second picture of the great spotted woodpecker, this was only shot at ISO 800, so a much lower ISO number, so there should be less noise present, and there is, but there's still a little bit of noise. And the reason for this is because darker toned images or darker toned areas do show noise more than lighter toned areas. So it's not just about the camera you're using when it comes to ISO performance. It does the tonal range of the picture also has an effect on the amount of noise that you can see, and darker areas just do show more noise than lighter areas. Now, the image quality on the Nikon Z6II again is excellent. You have to bear in mind though, it is a 24 million pixel sensor, so the ability to crop really tight is not as great as, say, a sensor that's got 45 million pixels. So you do have to bear that in mind. So on the one hand, as I've already mentioned, ISO performance is brilliant because the pixels are bigger and they're less scrunched together because there's less of them on that full frame sensor, but it does give you less ability to crop. But if you're not cropping massively, the picture quality is superb, and there are third-party types of software that you can increase the file resolution in any case. So I think, you know, from an image quality point of view, you're not going to be disappointed with the Z6II. The colours that Nikon produce are absolutely fantastic. The fine detail's really good, and you can still crop. There are enough pixels on that 24 million megapixel sensor in order to crop at least to a certain extent. So image quality great, nothing to complain about. The image quality produced on the Z6II is really good as well, and if you look at this picture of a bearded tit, you can see there's loads of fine detail in both the plumage, the eye, the beak, the whole of the bird actually. And when we zoom in tight, you can see that fine detail is still present. So even though it's only a 24 million pixel sensor, I think there's more than enough image resolution for wildlife photography, and there's enough image resolution to still put in a decent crop. Obviously you can't crop as much as you would be able to on, say, a 45 million pixel camera or 45 megapixel camera, but there's still enough wiggle room or enough resolution to crop on the 24 million pixel sensor of the Z6II. So image quality, again, no worries at all. I think it's superb image quality, and I'm really happy with the pictures I'm getting from this camera. One of the things I like about mirrorless camera bodies is the fact that they're so quiet, and it's the same for all mirrorless camera bodies, not just the Nikon Z6II, but it's like having a silent camera. If you turn the camera to electronic shutter, it is absolutely silent. So you've got no chance of scaring off really nervous wildlife by the the noise of the shutter. It's a fantastic option for wildlife photography. So I think that's a good reason to go mirrorless. and the Z6II is utterly silent, just the same as any other camera manufacturer. And then when it comes to frame rate, you can shoot up to 14 frames a second, which isn't as quick as a lot of cameras now that are shooting at 20, 30, maybe even 60 frames a second. But I find 14 frames a second is enough, unless I'm doing really fast moving woodland birds that are taking off. And then I feel I could do with a few more frames per second, and the 20 to 30 frames per second in that sort of specific situation would be good to have. So generally 14 frames per second is adequate, but would we like more? Yeah, probably. If you look at this picture of a great tit taking off, this was captured using burst mode on the Z6II, so I'm shooting at 14 frames a second, and it's quick enough to capture this animal in takeoff mode. Now, woodland birds are really quick, and the minute they decide to fly, they are up and they're gone. So in order to capture that sort of action, you do need a fast frame rate. And in general, I've found 14 frames a second for most action is absolutely fine. There are occasions with woodland birds, because they are so quick, even if you're shooting and you've got the shutter button pressed down and you're already taking pictures as that bird takes off, there's still occasions when you end up with half a bird in the frame and half a bird out the frame, because the frame rate at 14 frames a second isn't quite quick enough. Now, that doesn't happen for most animals, so it's not a deal breaker by any means, and I'm really happy generally with the frame rate on the Z6II. Would I like 20, 30 frames a second? Yeah, we're always going to want more, but it's certainly, as I say, not a deal breaker, and for most action shots that I've taken, it's been fast enough. So to summarise, my 2 years of using the Z6II as a wildlife photography camera, it's been generally positive. Now, the reason I bought the Z6II initially was because I'm doing a lot more wildlife filming, and having the electronic viewfinder and the ability to shoot slow motion footage was the reason I switched to the Z6II. And over the last 2 years, I've recorded footage that I could have never have got with my the current DSLRs that I was using. So for me, the Z6II has been a massive success. Would I advise people to buy one now? It really depends on what you're going to use it for. If you're desperate to do wildlife filming and you're a Nikon user and you don't want to go for the Z9, then I think the Z6II is a fantastic camera, and it will be adequate for stills and great for video. If you're not desperate to shoot video and you're a Nikon user and you've got great Nikon DSLR bodies such as, let's say, the Nikon D850 or the Nikon D500, I would stick with those for the moment, because the next generation of mid-range Nikon mirrorless camera bodies will have bird eye detect. I'm absolutely sure, because if they don't, they are going to lose market share like no one's business. They are really going to lose out in the market. Most other camera manufacturers, the big ones, Sony, Canon on the full frame, Olympus and others on the Micro Four Thirds, have got good animal eye detect. They've got bird eye detect, and we really need that if we're going to get the most out of modern autofocus systems. So yes, my advice is, for me, because I wanted to film slow motion footage of wildlife, the Z6II has been great. Am I looking forward to the Z6III or another camera body that has a better autofocus system with bird eye detect tracking and animal eye detect tracking? Yes, and I will get one of those as soon as they come out. Obviously the Nikon Z9 has got that, but it's £5,500 almost, or £5,300, and it's really big and heavy. So I'm waiting for that autofocus technology to come down into a smaller mid-range body. Would I choose the Z6II over the Z7II? Now I've used the Z6II for 2 years. Yeah, I probably would, because of the noise control, although the Z7II does give you more options for cropping. So it is really horses for courses, but I'm happy with my 2 years that I've used this camera for. Do I want an improved version? Yes, I absolutely do. So that's my advice. If you're not desperate to, you've not got a really particular use of a mirrorless camera body at the moment, in other words, you desperately want to cut down on weight perhaps, or you want to do wildlife filming, in particular slow motion filming, then I would probably wait for the next generation of Nikon mid-range Z cameras to come out with the better animal tracking. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit of a kit one, but I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, if you can give it a thumbs up, a like, that would be brilliant. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, if you can consider subscribing, that would also be fantastic. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to continue to shoot and film with the Z6II, but I am looking forward to getting decent animal eye detect on my next camera body. So yeah, bye for now, guys. I was really pleased to be able to get these two herons in flight chasing each other, and this is one of those instances where there's no way I would have been able to keep up with this action using a DSLR. Having the electronic viewfinder and being able to keep my eye to the viewfinder and track these animals in flight made it so much easier to capture this sequence, and I was also able to shoot it in slow motion, so 120 frames a second, which again, when you slow down the footage, it just looks so great in slow motion. So this was the main reason I bought the Nikon Z6II, and I don't regret it for a minute.